Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network. Also, if you do feel so inclined, and you guys have been doing a great job so far of it, contribute to the show through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. It's a great way if you want to get any comments, questions, concerns out there and addressed on the show, to kind of have this become more interactive. But you guys have been doing a great job. I can't thank you enough for all the comments you leave. And speaking of comments, we come back from the break with a comment from Andre again. Marv and CD are my top two that have the best matchups. They certainly have most intriguing matchups because both are facing very young, raw cornerbacks. I believe the top cornerback for the Commanders right now is Emmanuel Forbes. I know they have a lot of injuries in that secondary right now, but I do believe that it will be Emmanuel Forbes that we see Marv matched up with. It could be Benjamin St. Just, but I'm not certain because of how I feel like the Cardinals could line up Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. But that could be an intriguing matchup because Marv could get a lot of early looks. The Commanders secondary is certainly not one of the best in the league, and he could have another dominant performance like we saw against LA. In CD's case, he's going up against another young, raw corner in, I believe, Deontay Banks. And that could be a fun matchup as well. It's the first kind of divisional rivalry matchup that we get in this kind of slate of games for this week. And so it could be a nice one that could determine the game. As Andre also says, do you think Neighbors has a good game tonight? I'm a little worried. I would say that Malik Neighbors can have a good game, but be wary. I feel like you need to be wary of when he has the big games, right? Because in divisional games, it could become more important for him to establish himself as a stud. But in games where you kind of don't necessarily want to place that much importance on, you kind of want to explore your avenues with this offense, right? Because it's nice that Daniel Jones, like I said a little bit yesterday, has a weapon in Malik Neighbors that he can rely upon. But this offense definitely needs to become more varied because it can't just be the Jones and Neighbors show, because that could spell trouble for Daniel Jones' development and maturation, most importantly in this offense. But thank you for your comments yet again. Hopefully we see a nice game from both of those receivers tonight in CD and Malik Neighbors. But I do want to get to, as Andre also says, do you think Neighbors' yards or receptions prop is safer tonight? I would say his yardage prop is safer tonight because I feel like when you think about the target share in New York, yes, he's obviously going to get the lion's share of them, but I kind of feel like his yardage production is going to increase in divisional games as well. So look for him to get a fair amount of targets still, but look for his numbers to skyrocket, especially in divisional games. If I'm watching the Giants playing either the Cowboys, Eagles, or Commanders, I'm kind of saying that I think Malik Neighbors' yardage numbers will go up. But thank you yet again for your comments, if that helps you, Andre, for tonight's game in terms of your fantasy roster, in terms of betting perspective as well. But I do want to get to my own kind of shadow report because we do have some other interesting matchups as well. And we start off with a very intriguing divisional one as well, kind of one that could define the NFC South right now. And it's a weird one because this guy isn't necessarily the wide receiver one for New Orleans, but he can determine the outcome of this game in a very, very meaningful way. And that is Rashid Shaheed going up against either AJ Terrell or Mike Hughes. And I feel like the reason why this matchup is much bigger than whoever Chris Olave is matched up against is because Rashid Shaheed is kind of the skeleton key for this offense, if you will. He can unlock anything. And as Andre also says, and did you see CMC is set to miss another couple months, apparently? His fantasy owners are cooked. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, man. We're going to talk a little bit more about injury updates as well, especially with the teams that have been most impacted by them in terms of fantasy implications. But CMC, man, if you are a fantasy owner of CMC, you kind of have to be miffed about it, but in that sense, you also are at the advantage of streaming nice fantasy running backs through either the waiver wire or by picking them up week by week. And running backs are starting to become a little bit more of a matchup-oriented position, if you want my opinion. And it's going to become very important if you were a CMC manager to diagnose your favorite matchups by week and then kind of go from there. Because if you also are someone who played a little bit of hero running back, you might not have the same depth of other people who had the advantage of waiting a little bit longer to take their guy at running back. So if you are in that position, looking at different matchups that you like for different running backs who other people might not have considered is very advantageous for you at this point. That's all I can really say. But you kind of are in a weird position if you are a CMC owner. So thank you for that comment and that observation, Andre. As Andre also mentions, with me being a Mason owner, does that news skyrocket his value? I certainly believe that is the case, but the 49ers are a weird team right now in terms of fantasy stock, because I can sit here and say Jordan Mason is going to get, say, 100 yards per game, 15 to 20 touches, and he's going to be someone week in, week out that can perform for you. But I can also say that either Jawan Jennings or Brandon Ayuk is going to get a lot of touches in this offense, and as a result, elevate Brock Purdy's status, if you know what I mean. So it is a very fickle offense right now. But Jordan Mason is someone that I think a lot of fantasy owners will want to hold on to had they known about him earlier, because in the future, if CMC comes back and he's healthy and it's the fantasy playoffs, you can use Mason as leverage to get rid of him. And if someone wasn't diligent in, say, taking care of Christian McCaffrey in terms of not releasing him, then you can use him as trade bait and say, hey, either you can give me McCaffrey while he's still, injured. This is just me just kind of spitballing here. But releasing Jordan Mason after a certain amount of time and after McCaffrey comes back certainly will make sense. But he's someone who can be leveraged in certain situations as well. So that definitely skyrockets his value. But I do want to get to this particular matchup in the NFC South, because Rashid Shaheed, like I said, he is a very kind of volatile receiver in that either he can unlock a defense or he's someone who can contribute negatively to the Saints' overall outlook. In this past week, it was the latter, but this week, going up against the Falcons and the Saints wanting to win this game to really prove they're the cream of the crop in the division is going to be very important, because not only are you in a position where you can still prove yourselves as someone who can contend in the NFC, but you're an offense that can do it in many variable ways. And Rashid Shaheed, no matter who he's going up against, is always someone you have to watch out for as a corner. And whether it's A.J. Terrell, who I think will match up more with Chris Olave, or Mike Hughes, that I think that Derek Carr is going to have to take advantage of either one of them wherever Rashid Shaheed is lined up. So this matchup is going to be very critical. Maybe not in as big as fantasy terms as I can think of right now, but it is still going to be a meaningful matchup. And then next one I'm kind of interested in, kind of a more low-key one that I can't really tell you much about, but it's not necessarily going to be game-defining, but it's still a nice one because both of these guys are highly underrated at what they do. Rashee Rice versus Asante Samuel. I think that the reason why I like this matchup so much is that Asante Samuel is one of the more underrated players in the Chargers defense on the back end of things, and he is one of the better corners in terms of man coverage. And going up against a receiver, especially a wide receiver one like Rashee Rice, who is not necessarily going to be someone who is going to be a guy who travels through different areas of the field as often as possible. He's going to be someone that's going to interpret the field in a much different way than your typical wide receiver one. Because what I've seen with him so far, especially as a fantasy owner of him, is that he loves taking advantage of the middle of the field. He's going to make his bread and butter there. In some aspects of his game, he's going to want to go long, but at the end of the day, he's going to play it safe. And the reason why I like that in this matchup is because it's going to test Asante Samuel as a sideline-to-sideline corner as well. It's going to take him to kind of uncharted territory a little bit, going to take him out of his comfort zone. And if you know the Chargers defense, sans Joey Bosa, is not generating pressure up front, then look for Rashee Rice to kind of expand his route tree throughout this game as well. There's no telling what this guy is going to do, and that's why I really like this matchup. And then, to kind of finish this off, these two are very interesting ones as well, kind of in the AFC and NFC, one being a divisional matchup, one just being a matchup that I'm kind of intrigued by because of the status of both of these guys, Garrett Wilson and Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain has always been one of the best corners in the league. Man, so bar none. He's faced DK, he's faced Pickens, and he's faced Mike Evans already this season. And he's matched up with them on 53 perimeter routes. So this one's going to be a question of alignment and also a question of whether or not Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers can get on the same page. It seems like Aaron Rodgers is more comfortable throwing the ball to guys like Lazard or Conklin right now, and it doesn't seem like him and Garrett Wilson are on the same page on some routes. We saw it very often in the New England game. So this match can be highly predicated on whether or not Garrett Wilson can even get open, but also whether or not Garrett Wilson can get on the same page as Aaron Rodgers as well. I think Pat Surtain has a heavy advantage here, but as a fantasy owner of Garrett Wilson, the kind of caveat here is that if, it's not working out and he's locking him up, then it could also open up many different horizons for other options for Aaron Rodgers. So this one is kind of like a chess match where if you can't focus on what you're good at, you have to open up other avenues for certain pieces to work, if you get what I'm saying here. So this match was more of a tactical one than one was to be defined by stats. And then the last one I kind of want to go over before we go to a quick break is, of course, Justin Jefferson versus Jair Alexander. A marquee matchup that we haven't often seen in the NFL that much because both these guys have been off the field for these games in whatever capacity. But Justin Jefferson, in the game that he has played, has been very up and down. And as Jair Alexander is someone who is going to test him in a way that no other defense has tested Justin Jefferson so far. The Packers secondary has been one of the best in the league, forcing some of the most takeaways we've seen. He's shut out A.J. Brown and Calvin Ridley so far, and he's done an excellent job of that, and an excellent job of kind of being the captain of that secondary. So this matchup is going to be fun to watch, but it's also all about, Sam Darnold continuing to be someone who can play with State Creek football, because if Sam Darnold gets a little bit panicked, then Justin Jefferson isn't as big an X factor in this game as I might think. But at the end of the day, I think this one is fun because it's a divisional rivalry and an important early matchup that I feel can go either way. But let me know what you think in the comments. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, I get my final positional rankings of the week, my favorite defenses and special teams units that I think will shine in week 4 for you in fantasy. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that.
Looking for your daily